I'm Maureen Gallagher. I work for the Midwest region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I am the regional coordinator for the National Fish Habitat Partnership. And I've been working with the LCC as a steering committee member representing 6 fish habitat partnerships in the area, as well as identifying science needs and doing some of the actual science. I work in the realm of fisheries and fisheries habitat conservation. And when we say fisheries, we really are talking about all the aquatics that live in stream and lake systems. And in the fisheries world, we don't have a full grasp at a large landscape scale across states, multiple states, of the condition of those fish, basically their status, their distribution compared to historical levels. And we need to get an idea of what's going on the landscape with respect to stressors. Now, the Landscape Conservation Cooperative is interested in some of these really large scale issues like climate change. We're not even at climate change yet in the fisheries world. We have to get a handle on what's going on small landscapes, in those small stream catchments, the area right by the stream, as well as in entire stream systems where you have several streams coming together, that entire watershed. What factors do we have? Agriculture, urbanization, all those types of issues, and we have to understand how the cumulative effects of all of those are affecting fish populations. Then we need to look at climate change.
I'm Steve Krantz. I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service in Region 6, and I am also the Fish Habitat Coordinator for the Great Plains Fish Habitat Partnership. A couple of good landscape scale stressors are land use changes, particularly due to agriculture and farm bill practices. Typically those commodity prices will affect what happens across a big region as far as what's being planted, how much land is being broke for production. The other thing that's happening is from a standpoint of water quality. As those practices are put in place, those things are affecting large quantities of habitat, not just local. Basically, my opinion of landscape conservation is looking at conservation of our natural resources from a larger viewpoint, more than just a tribe or a state single source issue. It's looking at it from a population standpoint, and our Great Plains Fish Habitat Partnership currently encompasses parts or all of almost 10 states. And the stuff we're dealing with is the stressors that are affecting our aquatic habitats and the species that rely on them are really landscape type level stressors. That they are occurring across the landscape and not just localized.
So when our assessments are complete, which should be by the end of June, what we will have is an idea of the severity of human impacts on each segment of stream. And then we have an assumption that the severity of those impacts also tells us just how degraded a particular population might be. That information can be used by anyone. We want it to be available to federal agencies, state folks, right down to local watershed districts or zoning commissions. All those types of folks will be able to use the GIS-based decision support tool that we're developing to identify and target what types of habitat restoration they may want to do, where they may or may not want to, say, expand their city limits, those sorts of things with respect to how they might impact aquatic systems. So all of that will be available for them to be able to make those decisions. In this decision support tool is not just fish data, it's not just what the impacts are, but there's a lot of socioeconomic data. All the census data is then in there, so we know how to project population expansion. We know where we have impoverished counties, those sorts of things where if we want to try to do projects where we can also boost local economies, because we do know, given the recent fisheries economic report that was just released by the Fish and Wildlife Service, that fisheries habitat restoration is a huge boost to local economies. And so we have the data that can tell us that if we want to do a project in a certain area, that we might be able to help those local economies that are struggling.
One of the things I really see happening from the standpoint from a landscape conservation cooperative as well as the Great Plains Fish Habitat Partnership is the collaboration that's taken place, the communication amongst partners that normally wouldn't have worked together We're seeing folks that are working on a terrestrial issue, working with folks with aquatic issues, and making those linkages across those habitats that have systematic effects on populations. One of our greatest societal challenges right now is the fact that we've got a lot of societal shifts from a primarily rural background to more of an urban background. We've got generations that have lost connection with the landscape, with the rural lifestyles, the intimacy that they had with the natural resources. The other thing I think we're seeing is from a standpoint that we're about 2 generations from where our grandparents learned lessons that were tremendous to shaping our natural resource policies due to the land changes in the early 1900s. We're almost 2 generations, and people have forgotten some of that, and we're having to relearn a lot of that and reteach people to remember that stuff so we don't lose track of what we've learned in the past.
For example, sauger. It's a very popular game species that's found throughout the Plains and Prairie pothole area. So you have a local group, say a watershed and sportsman's group, that wants to be able to improve fishing for sauger. So they want more sauger in their area, and they want to know whether or not they have good quality habitat to support those populations. Well, they can go in and use the decision support tool that is driven by these assessment models to identify, first of all, those areas where we think we already have good habitat and good sauger populations, because they may want to do something close by so that they can expand out that good habitat. But then they'd also be able to identify, in their area, if they have a specific area where they want to work, just what they're up against. So they'd be able to identify specifically what types of factors they would need to improve. So say that prairie restoration needs to be done. The tool can tell them how many acres of prairie they need to restore in their area in order to improve habitat in the stream or in the lake for sauger.
I think that is one of our weaknesses as natural resource focus, is that we've lost track of those people connections. And I see the landscape conservation cooperatives starting to bring that people focus back into natural resource conservation.